Hi, and welcome back to Continual Fandom. We're here to talk about Heroes, the show. And so before we do dive too far down this rabbit hole, I'm your host, Jim Nettles, and let's go around and let everybody tell you who else is here to dive into the superheroes. Barbara, you're up first.
Hey, I am Barbara V. Evers. I am a fantasy author. Have a trilogy, The Watchers of Mania, that's out. Several short stories that have come out recently too, and I enjoy heroes, so I'm here.
Stuart?
Hi, everybody. I'm Stuart Jaffe. I'm best known for the Max Porter Paranormal Mysteries, but I write tons of other stuff with over 60 some novels and numerous series. So if you like to deep dive, there's plenty to deep dive into.
James?
Hey, I'm James Pittman. You can call me James. I write the Felix Chance Urban Fantasy series. You can see him over my shoulder there. And also the Pandora Squad military sci-fi. And, Heroes is one of my favorite shows.
So I want to start off with, I remember when the show first started coming out, and they were advertising for it and, just getting into the first few episodes. It was one of those things that was very much, you felt like you were sitting in a good live action superhero story. You were getting an idea for a lot of the things I think that we now see as a lot more common in series. We see elements of this in The Boys. We see a lot of the elements in this in the Marvel series. But it was one of these things that was not straight up and pure heroes and villains, despite the name of the show. There was a lot more gray area in certain parts of it and certain characters. And others were just that definitive black and white hero villain. But I mean, that was one of those things that caught me was you got to see that notion of real people trying to shift into becoming heroes. So Barbara, when you first started watching the series, kind of what was your take on it?
I forget what year it even came out now, but when the series came out, I was really hooked by particular characters. Obviously, Claire Bennett's one of the ones that you just hook into, and just the idea of you have this girl who's not really the cheerleader crowd, but she becomes a cheerleader, and she's all of a sudden indestructible and just not fearful at all. She's jumping off of things and everything, and it's really cool to watch. And meanwhile, you've got Iro, who is, in Japan trying to stop time, and it was just really intriguing to watch all these people trying to do things, and then to realize that there's this quote bad guy out there that turns out to be Claire's dad. And it was just the way that everything was woven together, and realizing, okay, this person has this part and this person has this part, and just seeing the little Easter eggs that they planted in early in the season, and to get it to kind of grow as it went. It really hooked me in, especially during that first season.
Stuart?
Yeah, well, so this show came out during the heyday of Lost, right? Lost was a huge show at the time. So this was only there were a couple other series that had tried to do what Lost did, which was unique at the time, was having an episode, a show that was one big story instead of a story of the week kind of thing. And this predates. Well, streaming was really just not what it is. I don't even know if it had started yet.
Yeah, we weren't into streaming yet. You were still into the
Network
even
TV.
Netflix was still sending DVDs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you really needed to tune in to find out what was going on, and so that was a very unique thing. And there were a lot of copycats after Lost, and most of them were horrible. And Heroes was one of the first ones after that, at least in its first season, was hit all the right notes. Mm-hmm. Just like Lost, they figured out how to juggle all these characters and keep it intriguing and keep this mystery going, and make you feel like they knew where they were going, that this was actually a plotted course. And unfortunately, I think just like Lost, they lied. But at least in the first season, it was brilliant. I mean, it was really great. They took a lot of pieces of other hero stories and brought them together in a unique way. I mean, it's the fact that the main superpower girl is the cheerleader is a direct call to Buffy, but whereas Buffy, the original Buffy, not the show, but the movie and all that, she was a cheerleader, like in the most vapid way, and also had to learn not to be that and be this hero. In Heroes, she's a little not quite like that. She's a little bit more sure of herself and to an extent. But that she's a great example of in the initial season that she like it's not that I mean you were saying, Jim, like that they were shades of gray. It's not so much of heroes and villains in that beginning, at least the first half of the season. It's people discovering they have powers and being scared by it and being unsettled by it. She that first time, isn't it? Is it she jumps off a bridge the first time, I think, or something, where where she has to trust that she's really not going to die, and that's a hard leap to take.
Well, and I think to that point, there was a lot of that notion of how do you take that idea of all of a sudden I'm given superpowers, and that's kind of why I viewed it as that gray zone of which way you're going to go, because if you're now invulnerable,
Right.
which way do you go? What choices do you make? So how about you, James?
So, came out in 2007. I was skeptical when I first saw it advertised because I thought, well, think about it. We hadn't gotten the Marvel Universe yet. Iron Man hadn't come out. A lot of attempts to bring anything comic related or in that kind of nerd superhero era to the screen had been not great and very poorly handled. But I remember just watching the first episode and just being absolutely blown away by the way they handled the storytelling, because you had all the entry point characters for different POVs. You had the cheerleader who's just coming into her power. You have the artist who is just kind of a few screws loose. He doesn't think he has a power, but he does. You have a guy who suddenly wakes up floating, and he's like, I don't know why I'm suddenly floating. Why are my dreams being so weird? Then you have Hero, who gets nerd culture, comic book culture, and as soon as he suddenly is stopping that second hand on the watch, he's like, oh, wait a second, let me start exploring. And he goes through the nerd handbook. And then you have just the ominous villain, someone who's just going around killing people, take their powers. You don't exactly know what's going on. And then you have the intrigue, porn rim glasses. So you've got so many levels and so many things going on. You don't know what exactly is happening. And it was just a well-crafted, entry into the whole series. And just from that first episode on, I was hooked. Every week I watched it. And yeah, it was prior to streaming. It was one of the last things I actually set my VCR to record. And I remember I actually had this coworker who loved it too. And whenever she missed it, she'd be like, can I borrow the tape? Can I borrow the tape? Can I borrow the tape? So, it was one of those really good, addictive series. You had to know what was happening. You had to know what was going on. And you're right, Stuart. You could not miss an episode. You had to see everything to see how it was going.
Well, yeah,
it's one of the few series I can do.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was gonna say, it's one of the few series I can recall that you actually had, one of the last true appointment TV shows you had to watch to keep up with it.
Yeah. Well, and again, they were taking that model off of Lost.
Yeah.
And in the same respect, especially in the early seasons of Lost, where it wasn't just that you wanted to know what happened next, but there were so many mysteries going on, and it's true of Heroes too. It was like, who is this character, or who is the bad, there were many characters hiding in the shadows who we didn't even know if the person we're watching is the person who's also killing people or doing that. And, what's it going to take to get the one brother and the other brother? Are they going to, what's there? There were so many questions, and they kept upping the ante every time. And it's one of the difficulties, I think, with pulling a show like that off. Lost had it as well, which is that being a victim of their own success, and that they one up themselves to the point where it's like, where are you going to go? Because
Right.
you're blowing me away with what you're pulling off. And then it's that whole J.J. Abrams box thing where, you just build this mystery so up that you have to have something that's going to deliver satisfactorily.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really hard. We all know this as writers. If you play that game with your readers, and especially if you don't know what's in the box at first, and you just keep playing it up, the bigger your payoff has to be, and it's really, really hard
Right.
to do it.
Yeah, one of the things they did so well was the backstory, which is something Lost did really well. And that's why you had to, I think we were DVRing it, to be honest with you. I think I had DVR at that point. So if you missed it, you still could see it. And you couldn't miss anything because backstory was trickled out to you in little tidbits. And you needed that. You wanted that. And there comes a point where if you're not careful with backstory, you're going to paint yourself into a corner, basically, in a corner of your box, if you want. But you run into that issue. And I think past that first season, we started seeing that. But throughout that first season, the story was so well crafted. And obviously, they knew what they were doing going into that one. At least it comes across that way. In that second season, that got messed up. And so we run into issues of keeping track of it. And you get into the third season and everything got really convoluted. The timeline's completely confusing. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't made it through the third season because I've lost track of, well, is this the real timeline or is this the maybe timeline or is this this time, and I'm not loving in the third season Claire as a villain. I really, Claire was the ingenue and Claire needed to stay the ingenue. However, at the same point, you said you got somebody who's indestructible. How are they going to go with that? That's a good solid point. So maybe they decide to pursue, what if she goes the bad way? And all of a sudden, she and Peter are head to head and they were always together. And so it kind of destroyed some of what you counted on, if that makes sense.
Well,
absolutely. It's almost like they took. Claire was basically Supergirl, but they with Superman and Supergirl, it's like the writers looked at that comic book series and took all the wrong parts of it. There are plenty of ways. You want to know how to deal with an indestructible hero? There's decades of comic books and movies dealing with those two characters. And giving some good way, handling it some good ways, and then there's so many bad ways. So it's frustrating.
Well, and one of the things that I seem to remember is there was a lot of stuff about the original plan was going to be that every season was a new batch of heroes, kind of coming into their powers and everything else, and all of a sudden it was like, oh wait, we've got a hit show and a cast people so I think we have to pivot. And I think that was part of the problem too, was they had a plan and then they were like, oh, I guess we can't do that. And even though they brought in new, fresh characters season over season, they tried to then go with, we set something up and now we got to pivot.
That's always, that's what, I don't mean to keep bringing, I know this isn't the Lost show, but the two were literally paralleling each other in so many ways at literally the same time. And in Lost, there, of course, they weren't going to be bringing in a lot of new characters. There's only whoever's on the island. But they did have plans to bring in more, people that were on the plane that they hadn't looked at. And they had a plan, more or less, somewhat of a plan, and eventually settled down and okay, we can end this show in so many seasons, And the studios came back and said, well, you need to do 2 more seasons than that. We want to make more money. And that's part of what screwed everything up. They're like, well, what are we going to do?
Right.
And so they just start throwing and it becomes a mess. And here you have the same thing. I have a feeling it was mostly studio pressure that was like, you have a hit show now, so you got to do it this, and this way. And they're like, what are we going to do?
And how many things get ruined for that very same reason, because something's a hit and we got to keep going after it, keep going after it. And you see that happen and repeat where they're not quite ready to do something, but they're forced to do something. And I've seen it in, for some reason, and this is totally off the track, but the Divergent series of books. I don't know if you've read them, but the third book, the points of view, there are 2 points of view, and they sound exactly the same. And I'm convinced that she was forced to write that third book way too quick, way too soon, way before she was ready. Whereas, with TV shows like this, if you get pushed by the networks, hey, we want another season, what are you going to do with it? And especially if you have an idea of where your story is going, and all of a sudden you've got to grow something that you weren't expecting. I mean, we're all, writers. We know that can be a challenge because you have a vision of where you're going. And then suddenly someone says, no, I need you to vision to do this. And it's not really your vision, it's someone else's vision. And that can get very messy very fast.
It always blows my mind that there's so many examples of it being done right where they don't do that. They just let the show be as many, Babylon 5 was supposed to be, 5 seasons, and that's what it was.
Yep.
And it was meant that way from the beginning, and they just ran it and enjoyed it. And, Sons of Anarchy, I'm pretty sure was planned out from the beginning and pretty much just followed their plan.
So let's dive in a little bit into some of the characters, right? Because again, I think this is where we see people coming into power, and that a lot of that was what was interesting to me was how are people going to respond to that? How are people going to react to that? So, and Stuart, I'll throw this one to you first. What were your first thoughts on the characters and the powers and how they kind of played that version of superhero?
Well, I'll go with the villain side of it, because Zachary Quinto, of course, this was his big break, and in that first season, he was like the perfect villain. He was, he was threatening in everything he did, and I always find that a really good villain. You may not know why they're doing what they're doing. You may not have any backstory, but you are there's something that actor is able to exude, or a combination, like in the case of Darth Vader, which is an actor and a voice actor. But really, the moment Darth Vader comes on, you're just scared of him. When you're a kid watching that, and you just know there's threat. The moment Spike shows up, in the very beginning of Buffy, he is a vampire, like a bloodthirsty, I want to kill people vampire, and he's the one that could kill Buffy, like he killed other of her kind. So, and I thought, this was just this guy going up and slicing people's heads open, and all this was just. That actor really clicked into it and really portrayed it. And we can talk more villains later, but yeah, I think it was a combination of the actor really giving forth, really understanding what he's doing, and the writing. I don't recall them giving him a lot of dialogue heavy stuff in the beginning. It was mostly. And that's part of what made it. I mean, you just didn't know what was going on there. And that's a really effective way to do a villain. It's not the only way to do an effective villain, but it's definitely, especially when that villain has kind of power. And that's beyond, it has special magical power. That makes it even freakier because there's like, you don't know are they doing it for a logical reason or something they can consider logic, or they just insane, or who knows?
James?
So I like like I was talking about earlier, you have some who were familiar with superhero concepts and some who have absolutely no idea, like the cop who could hear thoughts. He's a cop and he's all of a sudden hearing criminal things. So, you have a lot of fertile ground to explore there. But more than that, I like how when you had the regular people who get extraordinary powers start growing and understanding their powers. And as a viewer, you're starting to understand their powers and you're starting to try and puzzle piece things together, using those different powers, like how, the comic artist and all the prophetic things that happen with his paintings and how, he's immediately a target. And to Stuart's point with the villain, it's the same thing. You're trying to figure out how his power works too. But unfortunately, the only thing you realize about his is, oh, he cuts their brains open and figures out how their powers work to make his power work. Okay, higher stakes with the learning curve on his than, say, the cop who is hearing the guy think about he's going for his gun and preemptively takes action. Or the split personality, which, by the way, I really love the cinematography use with that character because all the reflections, and you'd see her strong self, her evil self, the one that would come out when she went dormant. You would always see like the trick shots, and it was just so gorgeous. Very like different levels of storytelling visually, with dialogue, with just, as you're saying, with mood and just acting. There was a smorgasbord of just so many good things in that show, just that melded together. But, it was great to see the ones who didn't know what was going on, the ones who actually did know what was happening to them, like the brother who could fly, who just kept denying it. And the ones who had already figured out their power and had figured out they're on like horn-rimmed glasses side with the Haitian, or, the ones who you didn't know how their power worked and they weren't explaining how their power worked. They were just showing, like the Haitian. Threatening, menacing. You don't know exactly how his memory trick works and what all he can actually do because he's kept mysterious. He's figured his stuff out. Everybody else, they're trying to figure out what they can do. Claire's leaping off of oil rigs and running into train
Burning
wrecks.
trains.
Yep. Oil trains that blow up and coming out with the cinder and the smoke, and she's just healing. So I really enjoy the discovery process with all those, the different types of characters and the different ways they went about it with the different powers.
Barbara?
Yeah, you were talking about the split personality, Nikki, Tracy. She had 3 names. I can't remember the first name, but her original name, and then she would become Tracy, and then she would become, I think later she was Nikki, or I don't know. I got it all mixed up after a while, but her whole storyline was very engrossing. Because you've got DL who can walk through walls. You've got their son who it turns out can do technical wizardry like you would not believe. And they're all kind of keeping it secret from each other. And you're wondering how they managed to do that, considering all that's going on. And of course, the kid knows there's something up with mom. But it was kind of cool to have this woman who, she's the 2 sides of the coin that Claire ends up being, actually, because she's the good person and the bad person, but she's in that same person. And then I think it's somewhere in the near the end of the second season or in the 3rd season, we figure out that there actually were triplet, I don't know, something, they were triplets or something along those lines. But that somehow two of them absorbed into the same psyche or something along those lines. But these are things that just kind of grab you. And then you mentioned the Haitian, you've got Matt Parkman, who's the cop, and we see the Haitians' impact probably the most significant way when Matt's trying to read into somebody. He's trying to hear their thoughts, and the Haitian's there and blocking everything. And, so Matt's getting really screwed over with, is it the CIA or the FBI? I don't remember which he was with, but he's getting really screwed over because all of a sudden he's coming across like this horrible idiot who really should never have been promoted and all this other kind of things going on. And it's because there's this someone else with a power that he knows nothing about, because as far as he knows, he's the only one with the power. That's the intriguing thing, is they don't know each other has powers. Nathan and Peter, at first you think Peter really doesn't have powers because Nathan's the one who flies. But then we figure out Peter can do what Siler can do without cutting people's brains open. And so there's just all these really clever ways that they gave each of them something different. And then you add someone like, I'm looking, I've got the cast and crew over here because I'm horrible with character names. So that's why I'm pulling out character names, because I've got them in front of me, you guys. So I cheat on these things. But you have these different people who can pull out something. You later meet Matt's dad and discover that Matt has inherited this from his dad, but yet there's this whole idea of the eclipse and how it manifested these powers. But then Arthur Petrelli obviously had powers previous to the eclipse. So when did the powers, there are a lot of unanswered questions that I'm assuming maybe if I stuck through all 4 seasons. Nope, not answered. Okay. Stuart says no.
I think there was a theory that would have happened in the undone 5th season, but
right. The show just got canceled, so they never. Yeah, there's a lot left hanging, but I don't think it's going to get answered.
They tried to reboot it with Reborn and try to backload some story, but it didn't pan out either.
I think that's the thing about the show that made it that we all really gravitated to, and you were touching on it there, Barbara, is just how intriguing all these different storylines were, and we got a taste for how they might interact with each other, like with the Haitian and the cop and all that. But overall, it was like it's like one of the cardinal sins of writing is that they had a great opening act, and then just they didn't deliver on any of the promise that they gave us, and so I have a love-hate thing with this show, obviously, because it was so well done and it had so much potential, and they lucked into a cast of unknowns who were like fantastic, and they had great writing and all these things hitting on all cylinders. And then whether it was because of, I'm sure it was a combination of business side stuff, politics and things going on, but it also seemed like the writers just couldn't, stick their landing. They couldn't figure out what to do with it. And I think they ultimately or partially misjudged what actually made the show work. And I've seen that happen. We've seen that all happen before, where they think the show is exciting to all of us for reason X, and it's really reason Y, but they just keep doubling down on X, and we're like, no, don't do that. Do this.
It's all about knowing your audience and what motivates your audience, and they missed the mark there.
Yeah.
Well,
and I think part of that is because they didn't expect their audience to be as huge as it was. So then they're trying to please everybody and failing on all sides.
So I'm curious, James, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask James a question. James, you seem to know a good bit about the whole series as it developed and everything. how much did the screenwriter group change over the 4 seasons that they did? Do you know? Is it the same
I'm
group, or
not
did they?
sure. I think there was a lot of mix up because the strike happened in the middle of the second season, so that was truncated. Then they came back, I think, with a different group of writers.
Yeah.
For the third and fourth, but also I think to a point Stuart was making earlier, they developed unnecessary plot armor as the seasons went on. They were supposed to mix things up as it was, and then they're like, "Oh wait, no, this person is testing well, and it's too popular, so we can't kill that character off like we should have." Anyway, I'm not naming names, but yeah, I think Tim Kring was involved the whole way through, but I was looking at it, and I want to say there was like 74 different writers and directors looking on the IMDb. Yeah,
I mean, I know that the first season had a pretty solid writing room, but I think with the writer's strike, just sort of threw it into
because everybody
and how do we fix it?
Yeah,
right.
Yeah,
it's like there are at least 30 different writers throughout the course of the 4 seasons, so obviously there was some turnover.
And that changes vision and changes the approach and changes so many different ways that you go after something. So
it also depends on, so this was Tim Kring's show. He's the showrunner. So the idea is that doesn't matter how many writers are writing the individual pages of the, he's the one who's supposed to make sure it all has that vision that Barbara's
cohesive, yeah.
And but maybe he soured on the show because of these problems, and who knows? But
maybe you let it go down the tubes, huh?
Well, I'm not saying he did it on purpose. I'm just saying that happens. It depends on the show. Some showrunners have a much stronger hold on what's going on. Shonda Rhimes is a great example of somebody who has a clear vision of what she wants, and it doesn't matter who's writing it. It's her show, and it's going through her. She's probably approving every individual line of dialogue, right? And there are others who have less control as showrunners. Partially, maybe it's their style, or maybe they literally have less control. That they're, I don't know what position he was in when he made this show or sold this show, but it's very possible that the higher ups, who the actual people who provide the money, are like saying, "We don't care what Tim Kring says as showrunner. We're saying it's going to be this and that." So that kind of stuff can happen.
Speculation based on interviews I've seen and things of that nature were he was given free reign first season. As soon as it hit big, case in point, I have here an NBC comic that they put out promoting the second season. So the higher ups got in with the synergistic wheel and was like, "All right, we can't trust you to handle this anymore. So we're going to start micromanaging. This is making us, above a certain threshold of money. Right. So we have to protect that investment." So they thought, and then, end up screwing it.
Right. Well, and again, I think also to that notion of the time it was that bridge time where really these large story arcs were being thought out and developed. And at the same time, streaming wasn't out there yet, but we were seeing TiVos and things like that were really changing the TV industry. Yeah. But it was I would say this is the final really major days of network TV creating major shows. Mm-hmm. And I think that you also saw a lot of execs that were trying to figure out how this next generation of TV was going to work. When I see that, but with that notion, so it was some of the aspects of story out of that first season. I mean, because again, I think that was the big solid season. Mm-hmm. I think the writer's strike and even just seeing that looming on the horizon had a lot of the impact on the second season. That really is what had a lot of the impact. But that notion of things like the company and intelligence agencies and all the other things that would be going on, where it's try and hunt down, who's the killer and all these other moving pieces. how all did y'all take that overarching just story for season one? So James, season one for you, leading up to the big, we got to save everything at the end of the season.
It's the only one I own on box set. So if that tells you anything, that first season, and it even had a satisfying conclusion, in my opinion. They concluded so many things in that story arc. They could have left it right there, and for most of my viewing purposes, they did. And I'm perfectly happy with the first season. They reached big and they scored. I think it was one, like with Lost and a couple others that I'm blanking on right now. That era of TV.
Like that,
which one?
Prison Break had a really
yes.
strong start. I think of it because the one villain in Prison Break is on the later. Is it the carnival thing?
Yeah,
he's the guy who runs that. He's on both shows, but yeah.
So it was the heyday of networking TV where they were actually reaching big and creating something cinematic before it really went streaming and the binge watching and that whole notion is like, okay, look, we're going to put a stranglehold. You're coming back week after week to watch this, and we're actually going to honor it and air it in order, unlike some series, which will, that's another show. But it was great TV at the time. And it's kind of one of those things that I see translated over into like the streaming world. That's what really grabbed viewers there in place of networking TV, because network TV lost that edge. And by just kind of micromanaging based on the previous 50 years of their experience, like, oh, no, we have to have a lovable cast of characters that stays the same. And they have, hijinks and they ensue. And we have all these marketing gimmicks now to go with it, like comic book expansions and action figures and things like that. And they lose focus on the storytelling.
So Barbara, yeah. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, so that's where I think season one is best left standalone, in my opinion.
I agree with that. I think it's this is a weird thing to say, but one of the things that the executives got right was in the advertising. But I say that because there are very few shows I can think of that had the short little phrase encompassed everything that was great about the show, which was, all the ads were the little thing of the eclipse and the thing, save the cheerleader, save the world. And that was the show. It was like, wait a minute, it's all about this teenager, but it's also about saving the world. And it's like all the mystery wrapped up in that statement. And it was just, all you gotta do is watch one episode and you'd be like, I have no idea what exactly that means, how it's going to play out, but I'm in,
Yeah. Yeah. Their marketing run up the entire summer prior to it was heavy. I worked at an NBC station at the time, and it was very heavily promoted. Hence, I got the comic book and the poster. It was probably, there was a promo for it at least twice an hour in Prime. It was just promo, but it was a very concise, good promo. You show little bits and little intrigue pieces, and you have that one line that everybody's like, how does that work? Okay, we're tuning in. We'll see how this plays out.
Not only that, I think they played off the fact that, what is her name? Hayden, who played the cheerleader. Those who had watched and seen Remember the Titans knew her because she was the daughter. And so if you were a fan of that movie, you already knew this kid, and she's a little bit older, and you're like, hey, that's that girl, and you want to watch it. And then you begin to see all these, you have George Takei in there. You've got
that's right.
names and then no names.
Yep.
And it's you've got, faces that now are so part of our culture that were brand new to us at the time. And then you've got these other people who I automatically know. I mean, Horn rimmed glasses. I don't remember what he'd been in before, but I'd seen him in other things. He always plays a kind of questionable character. Every time I've ever seen him, he's always played a questionable character, and he does a great job at it. He really does. Suresh's dad, he was another actor that was well known, and you're recognizing this is going from India to the U.S. to, we're in politics, and we're in, CNAs nurses taking care of people with health issues, and you've got all these different little elements coming together. And that first season, I'm with y'all. I think we could have stopped at the end of season 1 and I'd have been hunky-dory. Peter's dead. Nathan's dead. Whatever. We saved the world and it's over. And I'd have been very happy with that. I probably would have been disappointed if another season hadn't come. I'll be honest with you, because I was enjoying it. Just, we all wanted more to come, but at the same point, I think it could have ended there and it would have been better. Absolutely better. When you come back and you've got Peter in that train car, in the storage yard somewhere, and he has no clue who he is, and we're in, I guess, Ireland. And then we start discovering Adam and how Adam and Hero connect and everything way back during Shogun times and everything. And it just got too much. And
sorry, it hits a nerve with like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 3. Just send them back into Shogun time and have Samurai pop up, and like, that's just kind of like shock value advertising there for your story purposes. I know it had story purposes, but
this is the problem you have with shows that are built around not knowing what's going on, right? That's what the momentum of this show was in the first season. Same with Lost, and this is I said, or I was talking earlier about Zachary Quinto as a great villain, and that not knowing is what makes that kind of villain work so well. And the problem with these shows is when they go on too long, the writers start trying to figure out ways to give you answers that might also open up other questions and all this kind of stuff. But like with your villain, now we start learning about him and it humanizes him. And that's not, you don't want that in this with this type of villain, unless the only way you want it is, again, to go to Star Wars, is Darth Vader was a known, just a faceless villain until they decided there was going to be this redemption arc, and then they humanize him so that he can be redeemed. But if you're going to have him be a villain, and that's their main point, you can't. Once you start humanizing him, you can't go back. And Spike from Buffy is my favorite example of that. He comes on as just this horrible, vicious villain that is, the big bad for Buffy, and eventually he gets, vampirically neutered, and so then and a couple times they tried to make him seem tough again and scary again, but he just wasn't, because he'd been through too many things that made him, done too many decent things, or was turned into a puppet or something. And that's from Angel, I think.
From the female perspective, I have to tell you, Spike's like my favorite character in Buffy.
Right, but not because he's a horrible villain. I'm not saying he's a dislike.
He's hilarious. That's the thing. He's just funny. Right. And even from the onset, even though he was creepy, he was still, there was just something about Spike. But yeah, you're right. They did somewhat neuter him over time. And so, yeah, you can destroy a villain. And it's like, Zachary Quinto, it opened the door for him to become Spock, and he was perfect for Spock, and so it opened that door for him. I don't know what else he's done since, to be honest with you. Has he done much beyond Star Trek?
IMDb page open. Click on his name.
Yeah, that's true. I should just click on his name and see what comes up here. We'll find out. But gosh,
I'm sure he's done some things.
So with that notion, just kind of looking at everything of season two, I think it felt like season two was like, we've got to go explain where everything came from and go down. We're going to go jump back in the past and the big virus and everything else. And it felt like then it got rushed. But, it had an abbreviated season, but it also seemed like it did not have the same level of pacing. It didn't have the same level of urgency. And I think that that was part of what from season one was kind of critical to it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they were filling in backstory that nobody was really asking for. I mean, we were all curious, but it didn't really matter. If they could have created other mystery, other intriguing things in the present of that world, and real problems for them to have to deal with, but instead it's like now in streaming, you get like an 8-episode season, and when you watch it, there's usually at least one episode you're like, that wasn't really necessary, because it's always something where they fill in the backstory of some other character. They're just filling in an episode because they have to make it a contractual obligation. And you're just like, well, that didn't progress the story at all. you know? I mean, yeah, I got to see what happened, on the other side of the train when this was or whatever, but I don't care. It's not going to change the story.
Right. Well, and one of the things that's kind of interesting, because, I watch a lot of stuff streaming now, and to go back and watch old shows streaming, you begin to recognize kind of where the holes were that they got away with, because it was network TV and you had to wait week to week to week to watch things. And you can't do that in today's television world. You just can't. Streaming, it's got to be a better flow, because people are going to watch back to back to back. They're going to binge. And so, you go back and you watch Lost, which I was doing recently, and I'm with you on that, Stuart, too. I'm on that Lost train right there with you. Lost got lost. But the continuity is not as good as I thought it was when I had to wait a week to see each episode. And that's the same thing, I think, with Heroes, too. And where we were moving at that point, obviously, into the beginnings of streaming, the beginnings of binging, and the screenwriting world has had to change, because people do expect that continuity and that flow, and there needs to be something always carrying the story forward. So definitely is a different world than it was when these shows came out.
So what about season 3 with villains? Because this, I think, was that was the pivotal moment where they had a chance to kind of redeem the series. They were getting a full season. It was just post the strike. And so where did you guys fall on how the story arced and where they went from there? Because, I mean, Barbara, I know you're like, yeah, I'm struggling through 3. Because I think that's really when they lost a ton of people, was early on in season 3, was when if you look at the numbers, they lost a ton of people.
I made it because my grandson, I was watching this with my grandson, so that also slowed me down, because, when you watch something with somebody, you're not allowed to watch ahead, sort of thing. And so he got mad at me the other day. I said, look, I'm supposed to do this thing in a few weeks. I've got to catch up here, kiddo. I made it to episode 9 in season 3, I think. And to be honest with you, I got distracted one day, and all of a sudden I realized that we're in the jungle somewhere with Peter and Nathan, and I have no clue how we got there. I missed something somewhere, and I don't know if my grandson watched and I picked up. I don't know what happened. But, about the only thing in season 3 that I found intriguing was the resurgence of Arthur Petrelli. So we have the Petrelli patriarch showing up, and they could have done something with that. I think they really had an opportunity there, but I don't think they hit the mark, at least in what I've seen so far. They also bring Sylar in as a Petrelli child, and I much prefer Sylar not have been a Petrelli. I didn't think that worked. for the whole scheme of things, especially for the Siler story. It changed who Siler was too much. And Siler was a character in the first season who knew what he wanted, went after it, and eventually he's kind of like Spike. They wishy-washied him. You know, they turned him into this guy who wants to be good, and I'm going to be good. Oh, you killed my kid. I'm going to kill you. I want your power. You know, and just back and forth and back and forth. And then Elle comes in and corrupts him, and I can't figure out where in the timeline that happens. And that's the other thing season 3 started doing, is jumping back and forth in the timeline. And I couldn't figure out what was really happening, what versus what did happen. Sure, yeah, we saw why the train exploded in the first season. So what? Yeah, it's like you said, who cares? Cool, but yeah, all right. It was just, they tried to do too much with it, I think. And they should have stuck to a more cleaner storyline as opposed to convolute the story more.
Yeah.
It's always boring to see how the magic trick is done.
Mm-hmm.
I think they also, by that point, and you can hear it in everything you were saying, Barbara, that they were, I think the writers who were then writing the show were not up to the same caliber that started the show. And so they were just grasping at straws as to like come up with some cool twist. So now he's Siler's a Petrelli. That made no sense. It was there to try and make the audience go, and then hopefully talk about it so that, next week everyone would watch, not realize it. But those writers didn't seem to understand how you actually have to earn those moments. You can't just throw them in and retcon the whole thing, because then people feel cheated. That's the problem with retconning stuff is you oftentimes, if it's not done well, you feel cheated. You're like, well, then what the hell did I watch all that for, the first part for, if none of that mattered because we just changed everything. It's the problem with having multiple timelines, that if you're not careful with it, you negate everything that the audience has experienced, and then they no longer trust you, and it just goes down.
Well, which is what we saw in the numbers.
Right.
James, anything
Kind of
you
like,
want to add? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Barb.
no, I was just going to say, they obviously wanted to do a Luke, I am your father type of thing. And I mean, that only works in certain things. And it does not work in Heroes.
Yeah, so season 3 was kind of, how I was talking about the first season, I was literally waiting week to week to watch it, and I was, rapidly making sure I had taped it and watching it and everything. Well, by the third season, I was watching the promos at work to see if I actually wanted to watch the episode, and more often than not, I didn't, or I just kind of got a recap of it. And I think one thing that I love in like the first season is the quality of the acting and the caliber of the actors they got. And I think as the show progressed, they started leaning more heavily on who they could get. Like, you throw Malcolm McDowell in there, or you throw, let's see, going through the list here, Robert Foster, a bunch of, amazing Stephen Tobolowsky, amazing people who I, know the name of, and I've seen in a million things, and I've enjoyed in a million things. And, they're going to be on Heroes. I'm going to see what they're doing on Heroes. And it didn't quite work out for them, despite Malcolm McDowell's prowess. And I do believe I vaguely remember his storyline, and I remember enjoying it for the most part, or at least his character.
Lieberman.
Yeah. And that's how, well, one, I haven't watched it in forever. Two, I'm going off gut feeling there, but it was not distinct enough for me to remember this long term. Whereas in season 1, yeah, I remember Hormone Glasses and the company and the Haitian and, all the other little details. But, it was one of those things that I was literally struggling. Jim, when you said about season 3, I was like, let me run through the synopsis of these episodes really quickly. And I was like,
It was
that's
a
what the
season.
Eclipse one was.
It's
finally
funny.
paid
I
off the
completely-
Eclipse.
I completely forgot that Malcolm McDowell was in the show and all that. And the second you started saying it, I'm like, that makes so much, like, looking at it as a whole, you realize by season 3, things aren't working, and clearly the studio heads are the ones running things. And so what do? Let's start stunt casting, right? We're going to get big guest stars because that's what works. And of course, it's not what made that show work. It wasn't about big name stars.
It wasn't Sulu popping up. You're like, oh, that's George Takei. I'm gonna watch because it's George Takei. Like, no,
Yeah.
Right.
it was a
fact,
cool
he-
little nerd moment because
Right.
George Takei is George Takei, and throw him in as a not necessarily super important character for, I won't say like fan service, but it's the equivalent.
Mhm.
And then they pivoted from having it being bonus to being the underpinning of the show.
Right.
No, that doesn't work.
So the final season, which was 4 and 5, right? They tried to go and say, well, 4 didn't, or the 3 didn't work with villains. So now how do we go with a redemption arc, right? How do we go with the fugitive and redemption kind of an arc? And for that to ultimately be the route for the show because they didn't get a final and 5th season that they were hoping for. Did anybody have anything they even cared about by that point?
That show was so dead by that point. I feel bad
I
for all
don't think
the
I saw
actors.
it.
Yeah. I'm looking through the synopsis. I'm like, I don't remember any of this, so I probably didn't watch it.
Yeah,
I don't think I did either.
I was probably rewatching the box set of the first one.
I say that, but I'm not joking. I feel bad for like the actors because they know they had caught lightning in a bottle in the first season, and they are the ones who have to be the face of everything going downhill, even though it's not their fault. And they're stuck, episode after episode. Whereas I'm sure there are plenty of writers who were like, "I'm glad I got off that show off the first season, and I'm out of here." And so yeah, it's the ones that were stuck doing it all the way to the end. I feel those are the ones I feel bad for.
They still did fine. Everybody on that cast went on to do great things because that's one of the few shows where I can be like, oh, that's Greg Grunberg from Heroes. He popped up in this show, and he's I will see all of these great character actors pop up, and
Right.
They nail it every time. I'm like, okay, cool. I actually am going to watch this show because I remember their quality of their work. I'll give it a shot.
So is there anything we haven't talked about that you guys want to dive into at all?
How about the fact that the big promo image for the first season was the whole eclipse thing, and they didn't even address it until the show was almost dead?
Mhm.
You know what? I don't think that ever even occurred to me. I mean, you're absolutely right. It was like, it just became
It's just the iconography of it. You got the
Right.
iconography. I was like, but what does this have to do with anything?
Yeah.
It was like it was a trigger, but then they never really proved it was the trigger, or they never really said it was the trigger, but
Right.
they implied it was the trigger. And the implication was more in just the little intro thing there, and that was pretty much it. So that, and did they ever get around to explaining how Siler managed to pull powers from people's brains?
Something about, I remember he would hear ticking in his head, and his dad being a watchmaker, and he was like, he was basically a bioengineering artificer, if that makes sense. He just literally was like, okay, I'm going to undo this mechanism, see how it works, and then I'm going to incorporate that in my own brain. So, where was the scene of him cutting his own head open and
So he
rewiring?
remaps his brain, basically.
And something
That's
about
kind of what I'm guessing.
midichlorians.
What was that, Stuart?
I said something about midichlorians.
He's got little nanites in his brain rewiring him once he sees how the other powers work.
I'm just going to mute you, Stuart, after that one.
it's the problem I have with that movie. You just
I
don't
know.
explain this stuff. Don't explain it. We don't need to know. It's better if we don't know. I don't want to know how it works or why it works. I just know he cuts somebody's head open, and it's freaking that's the way they do it.
And then up the stakes every time. If you explain without cutting people's heads open, that removes his villainous nature, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I get that they were trying to. Did anybody watch Heroes Reborn?
No.
No. Okay. So they tried to explain how the Petrelli family line is all about taking powers in one way or other. They had, super OP Peter Petrelli, who just could be near people and absorb their powers, and then he had them on a Rolodex file and reused them. And then apparently, no, the cheerleader Claire's son could take powers too, which was how they killed her off because they couldn't get Hayden Panettiere to come back. But his was a one, not what was that? I can't remember it's a trope
Like
they use
one-time use.
Not one-time use, most recent use, most recent touch. Like if you, that's how they got rid of Masaoka too. Like they stole his power by going through time, and he literally stole the power, and he kept it until he, touches somebody else. Then it returns. So that's how they killed Claire. They stole her invincibility, being born. But they were literally grasping at straws, really trying to explain the nitty gritty of how the Petrelli family line works, which also I think they were trying to redeem themselves from trying to make Siler a Petrelli, because that's a Petrelli family trait, that type of thing. It's like, okay, are we just going all genetics and eugenics with these powers now? There's like family lines. It's not just a random manifestation you actually inherit from, that there's sometimes a mutation of it, or how? No, I don't really want to know. I don't want to get that deep. Just give me a good show.
Anything else we want to hit on? Well, in that case, I think that we can wrap this one up. And before we do, let's make sure everybody knows where to find you guys. Website, social media, whatever the latest thing is they need to pick up. So, Barbara.
Okay, so my website's listed right up there, barbaravevers.com. Also, you will find me on social media, Barbara V. Evers or Barbara V. Evers author. I'm on pretty much most of those platforms that you would use, Facebook, Instagram. I'm even on the X a little bit, YouTube, TikTok sometimes, things along those lines. I have a short story that's coming out this month in the Moonshine Review. It is not a fantasy story. It's a contemporary fiction story, probably one of the darkest things I've ever written. And I was in the recent Jordan Con anthology, and I'm working on an urban fantasy right now, hoping to get that to come out sometime in the near future.
Stuart?
You can find me at stuartjaffe.com. As far as social media goes, best place to find me is on Facebook. I have a group there, Stuart Jaffe's Madhouse. And if you go to my website and sign up for my newsletter, you can get some free books and short stories so you can try out my work for free and see if you like it.
James?
You can find all my stuff on halfacrepond.com and on the socials. Facebook, I'm J.E. Pittman Writes, and all the others is j.e.pittman. So I kept that one pretty consistent, but I'd already used the other one on Facebook, so Wright's got appended on it. Felix Chance series, I'm working on the 3rd volume now. It should hopefully be out in time for DragonCon, or at least late summer. The audiobook, I'm very proud to say, for Felix Chance Volume 1 is now available wherever you listen to those things. And I just released Pandora Squad Wide, so go request it at your local bookstore or at your library, or wherever you consume your written words.
And you can find me at jamespnettles.com. AuthorEssentialsWorkshops.com, CreatingPros.com, and of course here at Continual. And we'll see you guys again soon.